Welcome to University College Cork on today, which is a very special occasion. It's the day on which we have the UCC Alumni Achievement Awards 2013. And this afternoon, I'm in conversation with Mr. Leslie Buckley, who is the recipient of the Alumni Achievement Award from the College of Science, Engineering and Food Science. Leslie is a Bachelor of Science and a Master of Science graduate from University College Cork, a Cork native, and he is being given this award for the work he has done in both the public and the private sector, particularly in restructuring, and also for altruistic work that he and his wife Carmel do, which we'll come to in a while. Leslie, you're very welcome back to your alma mater this afternoon.
Thank you very much, Jean, and I'm always pleased to be back here.
Leslie, going right back to, I suppose where you brought up and went to school, and what brought you to UCC?
Oh, an interesting question, Jean. I went to Presentation Brothers College just down there on the Western Road.
Not far.
And my mum unfortunately died when we were all fairly young, so there was 5 boys, and my dad had this unenviable task of looking after us, and he never interfered much in my career of any sort, but he came to me one day. He learned that you could actually leave, you could go to college with your matriculation, and that you could get your matric in 5th year. So he said, Leslie, it's like this. I'd like you to come into the business. Maybe you go back to Pres 6th year, do your leaving cert, play a bit of rugby, but then you come into the business.
And the business was?
The business was floor covering business in Washington Street, Buckley's Corner.
Okay, we all know it.
Unfortunately, it's gone for the last 10 years. So I kind of said, Dad, I love you, but I'm not too sure that we'd get on that well together in the one business. So I decided I would take the option of going to university. A young lad of 17, and sure, it was only up the road.
Yeah, and you studied science, but did you intend to be a scientist? Did you intend to study science?
The closest thing that I was to a scientist was that when I was about 9 or 10 years of age, I bought myself a chemistry set and nearly exploded the house. Right? And but the true fact is, and this just shows how life has changed so much, there was no such thing as career guidance. I went into UCC. I didn't know many people at that stage in joining, because most of the class had stayed on to do their leaving cert. So I wandered up. I actually joined the shortest queue, and that's a fact. Right? I said, oh, this queue is the shortest. I then realised it was science queue, and I joined that queue, and that's how I ended up doing science in UCC. But did I enjoy it? Absolutely.
And on that very point, what did you enjoy?
Well, I tell you, college life gives you a level of freedom that you never get at any other stage of your life. And yes, you have to study. Maybe I took freedom to heart too much, because, and to a degree, I think I nearly got my dad back, because I went to UCC first year and I failed my exams. And God, that actually was a turning point for me, because, up to that you think kind of, God, I can get through exams with very little study. But I remember in June 1963, was it, standing down in the Grand Parade watching John F. Kennedy pass. And I had, the day before that, I got the results of my exam to say, Leslie, you failed it.
Goodness.
And I distinctly, and I was there on my own, and I felt very sorry for myself, but it was one of the better things I ever did. Because after that, then I went back and I did an honours degree, and, it just...
Good Lord.
I needed a bit of sorting out.
Yes, you needed a rude awakening.
Exactly.
Yes. And when you look back on those days as undergraduate, because I know you stayed on and did a postgraduate, were there any people, any lecturers in particular that might have influenced you?
Wow. Well, there was one particular man that influenced me, and he probably influenced me more before I left school, even though he was also a lecturer in college. And he felt, and he was probably right, that I was not a very good maths student. He was an excellent maths teacher, Freddie Holland.
Oh, yes.
And Freddie said to me one day, he said, do you know what, Buckley? They don't need guys like you in UCC. When it comes to maths, you're just a hopeless case. And I kind of being the stubborn character I was, I said, do you know what, teacher? I'll show you. And I went to into UCC, and I said, I said, I'm sure he was quite right, actually. But I set myself a personal task, and I went to every lecture that I could go to. I took copious notes, and I ended up with the best maths notes anybody in UCC at that stage. Right? And word got around about my notes, and I ended up making a small fortune giving maths grinds, okay, to anybody that wanted a maths grind at that stage. And it was just right here that my whole business life started, giving maths grinds.
Leslie, is an entrepreneur born or nurtured?
I suppose there's a bit of both. My dad, I suppose, to a degree, was an entrepreneur, even though he took over his father's shop. But my grandfather's shop was, you went in there and you bought clothing to make suits.
Mm-hmm.
And the farmers from West Cork came up and they got various measurements and they got the suit made. And my grandfather would go out and have a few drinks with them. And, he really enjoyed that part of it. My dad was quite different, decided he was going to change the business and went into floor covering. Totally different, but made a great success of it. And, I look back and say, I kind of never saw him as an entrepreneur, but he was. And he was a successful business guy. I loved working in the shop with him. I love working in the shop. Dad, every so often we'd have the odd row, of course, but he taught me, like from the time I could look over the counter, he taught me what business life was like, and really he'd bring me down on a Saturday afternoon, and as soon as I could look over the counter of the shop, I'd be selling floor covering.
And Leslie, what is business life like? In other words, do you think there are absolutely generic traits that every business person has or should have? In essence, is all business the same?
To me, nearly all business is the same. People. I started off in Waterford Crystal, absolutely fantastic training. Then I went into self-adhesive tape. Then I went to Smurfit's corrugated. Then I went into telecoms. But to be quite honest, once you establish the basic rudimentals of business, they're all the same. And you can just move them to one place. I remember a guy, I went in as an advisor to Aer Lingus about 15 years ago. And a guy stopped me and he said, like, Leslie, what do you know about airplanes? I said, as much as I knew about crystal or self-adhesive tape or anything else. But that's not what excites me. What actually excites me is the business aspect of it. And whether it's turning it around, whether it's growing it, whether it's developing it, that's what really gets me.
And what do you think, because this interview will be watched by students along the way, what would you say those traits are? Not necessarily to state that if you don't have those traits you won't be good in business, but what would you say are the core traits that somebody needs to have and appreciate to be good at business?
I suppose to a degree you need a bit of luck.
Okay.
First. But you do need, and when I was a college student, I wasn't a particularly good student, so I wasn't very focused. But I look back and I say, you know what, science degree, whilst I never used it later in my life, it actually helped me to concentrate when I had to be very focused when it was needed to, and then also, I'd add to that and be prepared to take some risks. Mm-hmm. And for students nowadays that are doing particular degrees, keep it as general as you can for as long as you can, right? Don't specialize too early, unless you're doing particular aspects of medicine. But if you're going into business, because I had set myself a target to be general manager when I went to 35. I knew I wasn't going to be a general manager in Waterford Crystal, so I left. I was the first manager to ever leave Waterford Crystal, and I couldn't tell anybody in Waterford Crystal I was leaving to join a company on a 3-day week, because they would have had me in the local mental hospital. They just wouldn't believe it. And I joined a company on a 3-day week, and the challenge for me was to get it back onto a 5-day operation, and then start making money, and that was it. Then I'm approached by Smurfit's, and the challenge to me then was actually to a totally different area. There was really heavy union negotiations, and that's where I actually started all and did an awful lot of my union negotiations. But I took huge risks with the unions as well, and I went out in a limb on many occasions against what maybe the Smurfit group would have wished me to do. But sometimes I failed in it, and I put up my hand and I said I failed. Other times I won the battle, and we were able to make a proper business of it.
I suppose a lot of it does boil down to good communication skills and sensing where other people are coming from, what their position is. When you talk about negotiations, and you've done a lot of negotiations in different organisations you've been associated with, you clearly have to understand why the other person has that opinion.
Absolutely, and negotiations are strange. I know union negotiations, both sides, one side of the table, management at the other side of the table, and look, they can hardly look one another in the eyes at the start of it. I always wanted the negotiation so that if there was a break in the negotiations, it didn't matter where anybody was sitting, okay, that we were all trying to work it out together, right? And if I had a document and it was management side, I was dead happy to share it with the people at the other side, right? And that only builds up with time and trust. And trust is a really important thing in negotiations with anybody, right? And in business life, whether you're buying a company, doing a deal, if you say you're going to do something, do it. If you promise the union something, do it. Even though you might, be sorry you made that promise the following morning, just commit yourself. If you're raising cash for the business and you're out there taking shareholders' money, perform to do what you said you would do. And if you do that, then you'll succeed. Yeah. But if you don't, and it's about building trust. In ESET Telecom, when we had very little money, we brought the business, we did an IPO, a public offering, we did a $10 a share, and eventually that business 4 years later, it wasn't our making. Telenor put a bid against the company. So therefore we brought in a white knight. BT bought it, but we sold it for $100 a share, right? So by God, we're our shareholders happy. So that allows Dennis to go back to shareholders and stock bondholders, again and again, because you build up the trust and you build up the performance.
How did you meet Dennis, Leslie?
Wow. A guy rang me one day and he said, look, Dennis OBryan wants to know, would you have a look at his business? That was the radio business. It was 98 FM in Dublin. And I went in and I met him. And you know what? I was really taken by the guy. I said to him, look, Dennis, I said, I can give you 6 weeks. Right? After that, I know I'm going to be very busy. So I put together a plan. And I remember one Friday evening sitting down with Dennis about 5 o'clock and going through the plan with him. He said, gee, Leslie, this is a fabulous plan. This is a great plan. Do you know what? I'll just get the management to implement it. And I said, no, Dennis, it's not as simple as that. I'm going to want to bring the management right through it. Well, like that. I'm sure some of them were probably out in the pub at that stage. But Dennis made a couple of phone calls. He had the management sitting around the table. We were all explaining. We were there until about 8 o'clock at night. We went for a couple of pints, but it was just the style of the guy, the energy he portrayed, and then I got to know him on a personal basis, and he has to be the most generous guy that you could ever meet. When he didn't have a bob, and we were going to a function, Dennis would make quite sure you were collected by a private car, not a taxi. I don't know who paid for it. I'm sure Dennis did. Right?
I know.
But that's the style of the guy.
And you've been great friends.
We've been great friends.
You've rallied together, Dennis.
But you know what? It's down to that one word, trust.
Yeah.
He trusts me. I trust him. Right? And no matter where we are in the world, we talk to one another very frequently. But we know that whatever we're doing, we're trusting them, and we're telling them exactly what the situation is.
I get you. It's honesty and trust. UCC prides itself on having a tradition of independent thinking. And, as an alumnus of the university, would you say, or can you recall anything along the way in terms of your education here that would have cultivated in you a tradition or an independent thinking? Because you are an independent thinker, Leslie. You know, you decide on a particular route and you follow it, like leaving that company and going to a 3-day week position. Can you think of anything that you did at the university or the education that you had here which brought out that ability in you to be an independent thinker?
I probably never saw myself as an independent thinker, but you know, I actually look back and I think one of the best things that happened to me is that I did fail my first year. Now that might sound strange because of course I was enjoying myself, I was having great crack, but by God, it was one of the most humiliating things that ever happened to me.
Yeah.
Because I felt for the first time, do you know what, you failed. You know, you obviously didn't put in sufficient time, but you failed. And, you know, the following year, people often said to me, oh God, you're not putting in enough time. But it taught me, when I was studying, I was really studying.
Yeah.
When I was out enjoying myself, I was out enjoying myself. And I was able to combine that. And I think looking back, that just the process of going through UCC taught me that when you're doing something, be really focused on doing it. And I certainly wasn't the brightest, so I had to be focused. If I had to learn, I had to actually be very focused on learning. Sometimes learning comes much easier to many more people than it does to me. And so if I wasn't a natural physicist or chemist, so if I wanted to understand it, I really had to study it.
Yeah. Were you a sportsman when you were in UCC?
I played rugby with the Bagels.
Okay.
You know, minor rugby,
Uh-huh.
and that's it. And then I took up cross country running, and then I took up marathon running. But when I was in UCC, I played some rugby.
And what sports do you do today?
Well, I play golf, but very badly. I do a lot of hill walking, and I do a lot of swimming.
Okay, and that keeps the balance, I suppose, between, because my understanding is that you do have a hectic schedule. Like, tell us what an average month would be like. Do you travel a lot?
Yeah, I travel a lot. The last month, 2 weeks ago, I was in China. I then came back, and last week I was in the States. This week I'm here. Next week I'm in Dublin, and then I'm back to China on Sunday week, right? And that's we operate businesses, whether it's the China business or the digital business. We operate them as if they're publicly quoted companies, right?
Okay.
So we have board meetings every month.
All right.
And we get all the operations together in some part of the States for digital, or we go out to China, or before we sold the Seon Group, we'd have them in Dublin.
Did you keep a part of the Seon Group?
We did.
Yeah.
We sold all the Seon Group to the number one operator, Stepstone, their German company, just only 3 weeks ago. But we have, about 9 months ago, we bought the Monster arm, the China arm of Monster. And we're putting both, we've been in China for about 5 years, we're putting both businesses together. And there's a lot of heavy lifting yet.
Okay.
So we just felt that we just weren't going to get the value at this stage.
All right. And I presume that you obviously see huge market opportunity also in China.
There's a terrific market opportunity. When we went in there, 5 years ago, we were buying little small companies and we were very small. Now we're the third online recruiter in China, which in China is pretty good going.
That is.
We will hopefully get to number 2. Then you'd have to sit back and say, is it actually worth getting to number 1? Because when you start fighting the number 1 operator, everybody loses. So we might just sit back and be a thorn in their side. But just stay at number 2.
I know, Leslie, and many people know that you've been privately and quietly altruistic and publicly altruistic. And I suppose from my own perspective, I was particularly interested and involved with certainly when you set up the Haven Partnership initially, you and your wife Carmel. Would you like to talk about that? What inspired you and why did you do it?
I was away with Goal for quite a number of years. I used to go away with John O'Shea to Calcutta or Ethiopia or wherever, and I saw a lot of poverty. But I often wondered, why did it take me to be 55 years of age to kind of decide to do that? And I was always sorry I hadn't done it much earlier, because if you went away with Goal for a week, it always stuck in your mind. And all I did is I just got photographs taken with poor impoverished kids and came back and raised cash for Goal. I then and Carmel and myself had kind of said, maybe there's more we should or could do. And then I'm out in Haiti. Dennis O'Brien had set up the foundation there to build 20 schools in the first year of the foundation, and we did that. And I said, look, I want to go and visit some of those schools. So I was up in a place called Wanamant, and Jean, you were there as a volunteer, thank you very much. And all of a sudden I saw poverty like I'd never seen before. And I said, whoa, I'm really going to do something. I'm going to stop talking about it. And I asked the headmaster of the school that Giselle had built, I said, do you know anybody with land around here? And he said, well, my family own the land that's here. And I said, well, that's fantastic, because I'm starting up a charity. We're going to build houses for the very poor. But I don't actually want to pay for the land. Roll it on. He didn't actually own the land. He owned a lot of rent on the land. Right? We paid off the rent. But you know what? Without that conversation, we'd never have started Haven.
Imagine it.
And that's how it happened. And then I said, well, of course we could continue building houses here, but wouldn't it be great if we could bring a lot of people from Ireland out to just see what the level of poverty here is? Because this would be a great education, particularly for younger people. And that I did. And you know what? It was one of the best things I get more enjoyment out of that than probably most things I do. And we brought at this stage about 1,500 volunteers out to Haiti. We've reduced the number of volunteers now, because every time we had a build it week, it was costing money. But the volunteers have made it. And there isn't a town in Ireland now that doesn't know about Haven. Mm-hmm. Not because of me, but because of the volunteers.
And I can say, having been a volunteer on that first trip, that I would recommend to anybody to get involved. And the sense, I remember we were there for a week, and on the Wednesday thinking, gosh, is this making a difference or not? And then recalibrating my mind to thinking that if it made a difference to one mother and one child, then it was more than our time very well spent. Because there is a time, and I presume you have that sense occasionally, Leslie, and that is, it's a tiny drop in the ocean. What continues to motivate you?
Well, you go to a place like Ghana, for example, which is on the west coast of Haiti, which was very badly affected by the earthquake. And we went in there, and it's indescribable, the conditions that people were living in. We built the best part of 300 houses. So that means that there's nearly 2,000 people living there. We then got Digicel to build a school, so you have the education. Then we got sewing. We got sewing machines out to the ladies there. 65 ladies were trained how to sew, so they make their own garments. They don't have to go to their husbands for money for it. They're now selling them to the market. I had first Taluntish out there in August, looking at how we would set up a co-op. So if we can, and we're about to start up a co-op now in Ghana, selecting 4 or 5 of those ladies as the leaders, and hopefully we can get them selling their garments into Port-au-Prince, and so you then have a whole community. Mm-hmm. So you have them, they're decent homes, you have education, and you have revenue generating projects. And the men folk then, most of them are fishermen because it's by the sea. I thought, gosh, what we should do is buy them boats. And I said, no, we won't buy them boats. We got contractors to build some boats, and then they taught the men how to build their boats. Right? So they built exactly, right? And they have built, I think, 40 boats now, and they share boats amongst themselves, and they're earning a livelihood. Right? So the building of the houses is almost the easiest part of it. Right?
Yeah.
It's then to build the whole community around it.
Yes. When you look back on it, people would know you in terms of, your successes, all right? But behind everybody are a whole series of failures as well,
Say that
Leslie.
again.
And I guess when you're talking, and certainly, viewers and students in particular, could you, share not so much the mistakes, but the learnings through the mistakes? Because, you're not the kind of person, and nobody is the kind of person who wants to be seen to have never made a mistake, because no doubt we all do.
Wow, I made lots of mistakes. And the one thing, when we sold the business, the ESAT business, we made some money. And then Dennis and myself invested it in small amounts in companies. I don't think any of them actually worked out. Right? Why? Because we actually weren't involved in it. But no, not saying they would have worked out if we were the majority shareholders. But certainly after that experience, I said, I really do not want to invest in anything whereby you don't have some form of control.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And then you can look yourself in the mirror and say, well, fine, it's your fault. Right?
Yeah.
But the online recruitment business, we bought that business from a young entrepreneurial guy, but we owned it 100%. Right? And then we built it ourselves. Right? But at the same time, there were other businesses that we invested in, and I don't think any of them are around today. But unless you invest and take some risks, they can't all work out. We invested in a new airline business down in the Caribbean called RedJet, and maybe it was because we didn't have sufficient time or whatever, but we didn't put a strong enough management team into it. Right? And maybe that was because in the Caribbean difficult to get them. If it was in the States, it might have been easier. We put a 3-year business plan together, right? But we didn't put sufficient money there to say that's what it's going to cost us for the 3 years.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas we were kind of putting money in every time there was an event, and then we just said, sorry, forget it, it's just not working out. And the regulatory environment in Barbados, we didn't research that sufficiently either, and that delayed us. So that was a complete failure. But I look back and say, yeah, we did lots of things wrong.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting and it's inspiring to hear that, because there's always the other side to it. You hear about the successes, but indeed we all know that there are lots of other things. Currently, we would be, I suppose, reading a lot about you in the context of chairing independent news and media. And I'd be interested in your views of the newspaper industry. I mean, that's a challenging role, no doubt.
You're absolutely right. It's a challenging role, but it's also a challenging sector.
Yeah.
Because how many young people today are out buying the Irish Independent, the Examiner, or the Irish Times? Very few, and most of it is online. And the only way that we can successfully grow that business is that eventually the drop in circulation and in advertising revenue is balanced by the increase in digital revenue.
Mm-hmm.
And I can sit back and say, yeah, that's something that should have been addressed years ago. It is, but we are where we are today.
Mm-hmm.
And we have quite a challenge. When I took over just over last August, there were 4 or 5 things I wanted to do. Number 1, restructure the bank debt. 2, sell South Africa. 3, sort out the pension, which was difficult, but the people were good. And 4thly, have a capital raise, 40 million. We're now in the middle of the capital raise. I'm optimistic that we will raise the money, but then we've turned the ship, but we must now. There's only so much cost you can take out of the business. We must now digitalise a lot of that business,
Mm-hmm.
and that is a real challenge.
And therefore, you'd see that as the future, actually, in any newspaper business.
Absolutely,
Yeah, it's the online.
Yeah,
digital,
there's more. We can do the traditional business more effectively, but equally and in parallel, we have to grow the digital end of the business.
Mm-hmm. What would be, I mean, we're coming towards the end now, Leslie, you've been very generous with your time.
Not at all.
But
Pleasure,
what would
always is a pleasure.
It's lovely to chat with you. What would be your, I suppose, your personal philosophy on life?
I actually think that you have to be yourself. I see young people going into businesses and doing what they think the boss wants them to do, or aping the boss, right? And that to me ruins their style and their personality, uh, and at times can bring them down. I just think be yourself. If you have university education, you're generally fairly independent-minded person, right? Well, be independent, right? Be independent in your thinking. Be independent in how you do things, but also be prepared to work as a team, right? There are some people who are very bright, can be very independent, but don't have the empathy with people. And I think that's hugely important, because you know what? When you get to a reasonably senior level in a company, you're actually only the rider on the horse. You can only kind of twist the reins to a degree, right? You are dependent on other people to really carry out the work, right? But unless you have empathy with the people and know how to motivate them, and there are different ways of doing that with varying people, right? And that to agree is a skill in itself, right? But I would say to people, right, be themselves, right? And also just build on trust and credibility. Don't do anything that you think, you wouldn't like done to yourself.
Well, thank you very much for that. There are great lessons to be learned from it. And I suppose it's a great, we'll call it moral code. Today, obviously, is a very special occasion for UCC to welcome back alumni like you. What does it mean to you, Leslie?
I suppose it means everything. I was born and reared just 100 yards down the road, and to get a letter from the president and to be asked to accept this award is humbling. It really is.
Thank you so much, Leslie. It's been an absolute pleasure to be here in conversation with Mr. Leslie Buckley on this wonderful occasion at University College Cork. Thank you, Leslie.
Thank you, Jane.